The Chicago Bears are playing with fire at the defensive end position, where everything could be great or it could be a complete disaster.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, I want to look at the different range of outcomes for this Bears edge rusher position in specific, but it applies to the pass rush as a facet of the defense as a whole. But given where we've seen Montez Sweat have some ups and downs through his year and a half with the Chicago Bears, what we can expect from him, with Dayo Odeyingbo coming over as a free agent with a lot of potential, but still needing to prove a lot and then not having a ton of depth behind them, it feels to me like this group of edge rushers can either be a solid group if everyone pans out the way you want them to, or they could be one of the worst groups in the NFL, at least, again, on the edge specifically. Maybe the defensive line as a whole, with the interior depth that you have there, can bolster some of this, but you're paying Montez Sweat and Dayo Odeyingbo big bucks to be top flight edge rushers for your defense, and neither one produced that kind of season last year, at least in terms of, the big picture ways that we measure pass rushers. We all know it was not the year in Chicago that we wanted from Montez Sweat. When the Bears had traded for him at the trade deadline, he had 6 sacks in 9 games, had 12 and a half sacks over the course of 2023 across the Commanders and the Bears, famously led both teams in sacks in the same season. And so we were hoping coming into year 2, double-digit sack guy again, and takes off as this top-level pass rusher that the Bears paid him as with that contract extension. But comes back and has that 5.5 sack season, and all of a sudden it becomes a question mark maybe is too strong of a word, but right, there's more doubt that seeps into that. There's some question about how good he'll be. I think we fully hope or expect a bounce back to get back to being the kind of player, but given that he has this capability for a down year like he had in 2024, it's not a sure thing, right? You look over the course of his season, I think over the course of his career, I think the way that we can stay most encouraged about Montez Sweat continuing to perform at a high level is that even as the sack numbers have gone up and down, he's still been able to generate pressure on the quarterback at a similar rate each of the last 3 seasons. He's been right in that 12 to 14% of his pass rushing snaps result in some sort of, hurry, hit, or sack on the opposing quarterback. So that even though the sack numbers dropped from 12.5 to 5.5, his rate of pressure that he forced on opposing quarterbacks has stayed pretty consistently high through this mix. Now those pressure rates of anywhere from 12.4 to 13.8 in that range, that puts him kind of in this second tier of NFL edge rushers, which is okay. I think that can be an okay spot for Sweat, considering he's not, one of the highest paid guys, but he's kind of in that second tier of contracts. I think second tier production is fine. If you see guys like Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, Nick Bosa, TJ Watt, Trey Hendrickson, they're more up in the 16, 17, 18% pressure rate. Sweat's in the 12, 13, 14% pressure rate. And that seems to be a pretty appropriate tier for him. So over the course of his last 3 seasons, he has been disrupting opposing offensive lines at a fairly similar rate. It just hasn't been a super high volume of the, the biggest impact sack type of plays. And you're paying him, what is it, $25 million a year. Or that's his cap hit this year is 25. His overall is like 24 and a half. You're paying him to have more of the bigger impact plays than what he had this past season. But at the same time, I think he's still producing at a relatively high level there. It's just a question of like, can you get him to be everything that you want him to be again? Can you get back to being that double-digit sack guy to be the big-time difference maker? Because at the end of the day, he's making $24.5 million per year on his contract. He's making more than Andrew Van Ginkel just got from the Minnesota Vikings, and he had a huge season with some touchdowns and a bunch of sacks there. He's currently making more than Trey Hendrickson on his current deal, but obviously Hendrickson is looking for a bigger deal, and he's making a similar amount as like Rashawn Gary of the Green Bay Packers. He's making more than Khalil Mack, more than Bradley Chubb, more than Jonathan Grenard, who signed with the Vikings in free agency on a big deal, more than Josh Sweat. Like the Bears paid Montez Sweat big bucks to be the big time difference maker there, and they're going to need more of that if you want this Bears pass rush to not only just be good enough, but to be, like playoff caliber, go on a run type of take a big year to jump. They're going to need edge rusher production there because yes, on the interior, guys like, Gervon Dexter's going to give you another handful of sacks. Grady Jarrett should be able to give you a handful of sacks. The likes of Andrew Billings and Shamar Turner and whoever else rotates in that group, they're going to give you some pass rush, and they're going to be able to step up in big moments. But like you need that player where it's like, okay, it is third down late in the fourth quarter, it's third and 5, and you need a stop, right? You need a pass rusher to make a big time play in the biggest moments of the big game. Like that's what you paid Montez Sweat for, right? You paid him, yes, for a high consistent pressure rate of opposing quarterbacks being under duress. You paid him for presumably a double-digit sack type of consistency that maybe we haven't totally seen up to this point. But really, when you trade for him and then give him that big contract, it's about trying to be that like true number one guy instead of just like a very good type of guy. And I think the further Sweat falls short of that, the more of a challenge it will be for the Bears when you have him as your most expensive player against the salary cap this season. And I guess not quite next season because DJ Moore's contract buffs up, but he's going to be in the top, 3 most expensive players on your roster the next 3 seasons. That means he has to be one of the 3 truly best, most dominant players on your roster, or most impactful players on your roster. And I don't know if we need to take the moment right now to like power rank Bears players, but but you go up there like Jalen Johnson is going to be in that conversation. Obviously, you hope that either your linebackers Tremaine Edmonds or TJ Edwards could get back in that conversation a little bit. You hope Caleb Williams can ascend to that conversation. DJ Moore, and Joe Thuney is now going to be in that conversation. Although value-wise, financially, a guard's just never going to be paid as much as an edge rusher, so it's not a one-to-one comparison there. But you do need him to be more than what he was last season. You need him to be like what he was the second half of the year when the Bears traded for him in 2023, but like that over the course of a full season. And I imagine 2024 included some, nagging injuries and stuff that he was dealing with behind the scenes. He was on the injury report right away with a toe injury starting the year that I think was slowing him down, and then he had some shin and ankle stuff throughout the year. So there were like little things that can be a contributing factor in addition to the rest of the defense really struggling. But the Bears went into this offseason and now, heading into training camp, like this is the plan on the defensive line. Like it's gotta be Montez Sweat being better. And then of course the free agent acquisition of Dayo Odeyingbo on the other side. Odeyingbo's not here to make Montez Sweat better. If anything, Odeyingbo's here to take advantage of the gravitational pull Montez Sweat has on that defensive line to then get Odeyingbo better opportunities for him to go and succeed as an individual player. And I also am concerned that it's one thing if you can sort of bolster Sweat by having another really consistent, proven veteran on the other side so that Sweat doesn't have to have everything on his shoulders. But now it feels like everything's on Sweat's shoulders when Odeyingbo's a player who also needs to take a step forward and also needs to grow. And the more of these variables you have, the more potential you have for things to go poorly. So we'll take a look at what's at stake with Odeyingbo on the other side and the rest of this Bears defensive line, and why it really highlights the need for one more edge rusher being brought in somewhere throughout this process between now and training camp. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I have the Gametime app on my phone, and I use it all the time. I just went to a baseball game over the weekend for Father's Day, and I've got tickets to go see the comedian Daniel Tosh coming up here in a couple of weeks as well. And I got my tickets on the Gametime app because it's the best ticket buying experience I've ever had. They've got killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees. The price you see in the app is the price you're going to pay when it comes through at checkout. It's really just a great experience all around. And the game price guarantee, make sure that your tickets are 100% authentic, will arrive on time, and you'll always get the best price. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So we can have some decent confidence in Montez Sweat returning to form, right? I think the consistency of the pressure rate there suggests that sacks go up and down, but his ability to beat the guy across of him has remained consistent over the past few seasons. So we can at least kind of have some level of like, if he's healthy, he should be fine there. But you're also going to need more from the other side, right? That was the whole point of releasing DeMarcus Walker and not bringing back Darrell Taylor, right? Was saying the rest of the Bears' edge rushing group needs to be better. They need to be able to give more complementary pass rush to Montez Sweat. And so, of course, then the plan was go sign Dayo Odeyingbo, a 3-year, $48 million deal worth $16 million per year. Like that was, not the most expensive edge rusher in the free agent market, but certainly a significant payday for someone who you're expecting to come into Chicago and be not only a productive player, but a more productive player than what he was during his time with the Indianapolis Colts. And that's projecting, right? That's expecting more and leaning on your coaching staff to develop a player even more so than what his previous coaching staff had been able to get out of him. And that's certainly possible and certainly something that does happen, but there's no guarantee there. There's no guarantee in anything in football, but it's one thing when you sign a guy who has been a consistent producer and you expect that he comes to your team, he will continue to be a consistent producer. That's why they traded for Montez Sweat. But when Dayo Odeyingbo comes over as someone who maybe hasn't been as consistent of a producer, it's then a little bit harder to be sure that he will become a more consistent producer with you than what he had done previously in his career. You look back at what he did with the Indianapolis Colts, of course, didn't play a ton as a rookie, had a half a sack that season. We don't have to nitpick every single aspect of his career, but then played a much more significant rotational role his second and third seasons in 2022 and 2023, had 5 sacks in his sophomore season, if you will, and 8 sacks his third year in the NFL. This past season with the Indianapolis Colts takes over in a true starting role on the edge there, and the sack number drops down to 3. And I've been trying to make this point with Montez Sweat as well. Sacks are a very small fraction of he rushed the passer 400 times over the course of a season, and we kind of get caught up in whether 3 of those were sacks or 8 of those were sacks out of 400 is, I'm no math major, but that's 1 to 2% of his total plays. Do we need to wring our hands about 1 to 2% of his plays? Not necessarily. But when you pay a guy $16 million a year, and those 1 to 2% of those plays are really high impact plays, those are the most impactful of the pass rushing plays, that's when it's something that deserves going under the microscope a little bit. And we compare his pressure rate to someone like Montez Sweat. We have seen Odeyingbo consistent in getting after the quarterback there. He had a career high 9.6% pressure rate this last season in Indianapolis. So he's still ascending in terms of how often he is beating the opposing offensive lineman and affecting the quarterback in some way, shape, or form with a hurry, a hit, or a sack. But this is still, if we think about Sweat in that second tier around 12 to 14%, now Odeyingbo's in that 8 to 10% range. That's kind of third tier, which for $16 million a year, that's maybe a little more than you'd prefer to pay a third tier type player. On Odeyingbo's current contract, he's making a little less than Chase Young and then Alex Highsmith of the Steelers. He's making more than the Patriots gave Harold Landry, who's been a consistent 10-sack guy, albeit different ages, different stages of their career, of course. But like Carl Granderson of the Saints, he's making more than Joey Bosa's getting from the Bills. Like there are some other pass rushers who are a lot more consistent and a lot more proven that are getting paid less. And so it raises those expectations for someone like Dayo Odeyingbo to come into Chicago and start to produce closer to that level of player. But he hasn't necessarily done that before. And so you can be optimistic and hope and plan on player development. But as we know, especially when it comes to free agent signings, but even with draft picks, right? They don't always develop at the pace and rate and to the heights that you hope or planned on them doing. And so that's where I come back to this potential for volatility with this Bears defensive end position with the edge rushers, because I suppose we should quickly kind of throw in the guys behind them, right? We've talked plenty on this podcast about how there really isn't a number 3 with any kind of proven production, right? It's Austin Booker, it's Dominique Robinson, it's somebody like Daniel Hardy's been kind of rotating at linebacker now, so he might even be in the mix there. It's young, raw, developmental prospects behind them, right? There's not that true productive number 3 who is not a starter, but just someone who comes in and designated pass rusher. Like they're missing that. And so when you have one starter in Montez Sweat who has been consistent in pressuring quarterback, but hasn't been always making the big time impact plays you want, you're not sure. There's a question as to how dominant he'll be. He'll be a baseline level of getting some pressure on the quarterback, but question of how great that'll end up panning out to be. And then on the other side, you've got ascending young guy who's consistently pressuring, and you're hoping gets better, but there's no guarantee that he gets better and takes that big jump, and he's a 10-sack guy or anything. And so out of the range of possibilities here, you have both Sweat and Odeyingbo both have great years, and you've got a great Bears pass rush because Sweat's getting you 12 sacks, and Odeyingbo takes a step forward, and he's getting you 8 to 10 sacks or whatever, and wow, these edge rushers are really panning out the way you wanted them to. You've got the other end of the spectrum is, Montez Sweat's still struggling, still not healthy, or whatever the problem is, like still not making these impact plays, still not quite earning his full salary there. And on the other side, Odeyingbo doesn't take that step forward. Maybe he only gives you 3 or 5 sacks this season because he's still developing and maybe is hitting his ceiling and doesn't have that next step forward in him to come out. And all of a sudden you have both of your edge rushers underperforming, and then, whoa, you're in some real trouble there. Or there's always, room in the middle here where maybe Sweat has a big bounce back year, but Odeyingbo doesn't take the step forward, or Odeyingbo has a big jump, but Sweat still kind of lingers somewhere in the middle. And it feels like unless both of those guys really, really take a nice bounce back for Montez Sweat and jump forward for Odeyingbo, like if you don't have both of those guys significantly better in 2025 than they were in 2024, it feels like you're going to be in trouble. Because if only one of them is sort of back to form or up to snuff, then your other edge rusher is underachieving. And it's really hard to be successful when you only have one edge rusher playing at a high level, especially when you don't have good, consistent quality backups behind them to rotate in. And it gets even messier if I guess just for both of them really financially. I was going to say for Montez Sweat, but the same thing is true for Dayo Odeyingbo. Like both of these guys have big, expensive contracts that you are locked into for at least the next couple of seasons here. It's not like if one of them has a bad year, you can just cut him and move on from him next offseason. Like, no, it's expensive. There's going to be a lot of dead salary cap money if you're going to try and do that. You're not just be able to sort of clean your hands of it and move on. You're going to have all this money tied up in a player that you don't want anymore at that stage. And that's where it gets potentially messy and troublesome for sort of the team building aspect beyond just 1 year of not being good enough in the pass rush, but now it's hamstringing you in the future there. And so this range of outcomes, this volatility of this group, these edge rushers in particular, having the potential to struggle or the potential to be great, like it makes it hard to have a ton of confidence in this being a great group. And I think they're going to be in this conversation with some other teams where there's not one clear and obvious, this is clearly the worst edge rusher group in the NFL, but there's a lot of teams that have some similar questions like this that I want to sort of compare and contrast where the Bears are with guys you need to see more from this season versus other teams that are either heavily relying on rookies that can always be a real wild card there, or just have some other young players or sort of piecemeal trying to build a pass rush on the fly that kind of gives us a better sense of how this Bears team stacks up against some other defenses facing some similar question marks that we'll go through next on Locked On Bears. So I don't think Chicago is in a position where, given the talent that Montez Sweat and Dayo Odeyingbo have, even if the production's been down in recent seasons, like they're not going to be the worst group of edge rushers in football. I don't think so. I don't think that's the case. But you start looking around the rest of the NFL, and a lot of teams have more depth and more consistent proven production from those guys. But there's a handful of teams these are probably going to be teams that are, or I should say that these are teams that I think are probably, are going to surprise you a little bit. Of like, there's some other teams that are pretty good teams that also I think have some real edge rusher question marks, and maybe that can give you some, I don't know if relief's quite the right word, but just some confidence in saying, hey, like this doesn't have to be the end of the world because other teams that are pretty good are also in some of this conversation. Like it's interesting. Like there are some pretty bad teams around the NFL that have a really good set of edge rushers, right? I think about the New York Giants that were pretty terrible last season, and they've got 3 great guys, and they only won 3 games with them. Well, they added Abdul Carter now, but you get the point, right? The Saints have a pretty good edge rusher group. The Raiders have Max Crosby, right? There are some teams. The Jaguars have Josh Allen Hines and some other guys. Like some of the bad teams around the NFL do still have some pretty good pass rushers. Myles Garrett on the Browns as well, right? So it's not as though if your edge rusher group is underwhelming, you're doomed to have a bad season, or vice versa. If you have great edge rushers, you're going to have a good season. But I look around, and I think, first of all, the other team that jumps out at me right away is the big wild card of the Cincinnati Bengals. I think they're facing a similar conundrum here with Trey Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart, both absent and dealing with contract disputes where it's like if Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart aren't there, they have the worst edge rushers in football. Joseph Asai and Miles Murphy and Cam Sample, they don't have anything. If they're losing 2 guys they're projected to be their starters, any team you take away their 2 starters due to contract issues or anything, they're going to be the worst defensive end group in football. If you have Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart back out there, I think, obviously, given how good Trey Hendrickson has been, like that's going to be a better edge rusher group than what the Bears have. But a couple of teams that are like relying on rookies in really key roles there, the Atlanta Falcons jump out right away when they use first-round pick on Jalen Walker, and then they trade back up into the first round to get James Pierce. They sign Leonard Floyd in free agency, but Leonard Floyd kind of sneakily is now 32, turning 33 years old. He got old fast in terms of NFL years. Like I think the Falcons pass rush is going to depend greatly on how good those guys are as rookies. And as we know, like sometimes rookie pass rushers can come in and be great, like Jared Verse with the Los Angeles Rams this past season, and other times rookie pass rushers can come in and struggle, like Trayvon Walker and the Jaguars and a number of other players. Like that's going to be an interesting sort of volatile dynamic with the Falcons, where from week to week the rookies may be great or may struggle, and that's going to be a place that's a little bit more of a challenge. I think similarly with the Carolina Panthers, where they drafted Nick Scourton and Princely Umanmielen in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. Otherwise, they got DJ Wonnum and Patrick Jones, who are both former Vikings that were okay with some flashes in there, but like as far as an edge rusher groups there, that's a concern. They're kind of like the Bears, where like their interior is really solid with Derek Brown and Tershawn Wharton and Bobby Brown, but like edge has some boom or bust possibilities there with the Panthers, where it's like you can't look at it and say, oh, they're for sure better or they're for sure worse than where the Chicago Bears will be on the edge. It's just a real question mark there. And honestly, is Green Bay not in this same conversation where you've got Rashawn Gary? And Rashawn Gary's been a really solid player throughout his career. And I think he's sort of in this Montez Sweat caliber player where Gary's never been a 10-sack guy, but he's always in that 6 to 9 type range with some pretty consistent pressures there, but maybe not a tier 1 game-changing edge rushing player, but good enough to lead a pass rush if you've got enough other stuff with him. But like they're waiting for Lucas Van Ness to take that step forward as a developmental player for them. Like Kingsley Enagbare was kind of their other rotational guy last season who played pretty well as a former 5th round pick. But is he going to lead you? Is he going to step up in a starting caliber role? Like is he going to produce it that high? They drafted a guy in the 4th round. Like to me, they're very similar to the Bears, where it's like consistent veteran tier 2 guy, and then young guys that you're hoping continue to develop and take a step forward. And comparing those 2 groups of edge rushers over the course of the season is going to be a fun thing to keep tabs on here. And I'll even throw the Washington Commanders in here, right? As we've seen them move on from Montez Sweat and Chase Young and Jonathan Allen and I guess they still have Deron Payne, but like as they've had to turn over their young defensive line, they've got Doris Armstrong from the Cowboys they signed a couple years ago, who's, 5, 6, 7, 8 sack kind of guy. And then they just signed Dietrich Weiss from the Patriots. Also never been a 10 sack guy. They brought in Jacob Martin from the Bears. Like one of the Bears backup edge rushers is now like rotating with Cleveland Farrell as their number 3. It's not a strong edge rushing group with the Washington Commanders at all. But we've seen Dan Quinn find ways to be able to make that pass rush still work, blitzing a little bit, and they've got certainly some talent and depth on the interior there, and that's going to really put a lot of the onus on Dennis Allen for the Bears in the same way, where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe your edge rushing group isn't ideal, but can it be good enough to get you by while your defensive coordinator schemes up some stunts and blitzes and pre-snap looks that confuse an offensive line to boost the pass rushers that you do have, to make their job a little bit easier and to help convert some of those pressures into sacks by, scheming it up to make it an easier path to get home where you don't have to work as hard to beat the guy across from you. You can just get to the quarterback. Like that's going to be a real test and measurement for Dennis Allen here. And I think it helps that we've seen Dennis Allen's Saints defenses, of course they've always had talent there. Cam Jordan's been such a major piece of that, and Carl Granderson's been good, and they had Chase Young, and they've had good players, but like outside of Cam Jordan, they haven't had a lot of guys that you are like, whoa, that's a special Pro Bowl consistent kind of player there. Like he's been able to piecemeal it together a little bit, and so that gives you some faith that he's going to be able to do so with the Bears, alongside the possibility that, hey, Montez Sweat should be better. Odeyingbo should take a step forward. The interior should be good. I just come back to when we think about team building, when you're counting on a lot of shoulds, they don't always come true. There's a difference between like, we've seen this happen consistently, and so that thing that's happened consistently is going to happen again, versus we think this thing can be different this year, and just because you think it can be different and hope it can be different doesn't mean it's going to be different. Like it's that volatility that creates some real question marks here, and it's why I will continue to pound the table for going out and adding a free agent. There are free agent edge rushers with experience, with some consistency in their production, that aren't going to come in and be a starter, aren't going to come in and be a 10 sack guy right away, but someone like Zadarius Smith, who's played for Ben Johnson with the Detroit Lions before, can come in and be a really big boost, and just have that third guy in the rotation that you feel like you can count on goes a long way. But there's also someone like Matthew Judon, Preston Smith, Jadeveon Clowney, Tano Passanio is a former Saint who could come here in this mix. Even, somebody like DeMarcus Walker is still out there. I don't think the Bears are going to bring him back, but he is still out there. There are options here. It's not like the cupboard is totally bare in free agency, and I think the Bears, it would just be a lot more peace of mind for the pass rush if you had one more veteran in there that you feel like you can count on, especially because just being prepared for injuries too, right? Where if, heaven forbid, Montez Sweat misses a game or Dayo Odeyingbo misses a game, you're either starting Austin Booker or Dominic Robinson. Like that doesn't feel like a starting caliber defensive end, and that's going to really hurt your defensive line in a matchup like that. So we'll see how Ryan Poles chooses to approach this. If they do sign an edge rusher between now and training camp, or whenever they do, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on Locked On Bears. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen, you can always check out Locked On NFL. I co-host it on Tuesday mornings with Tyler Rowland. It also podcast comes out twice a day, but I'm the Tuesday morning co-host. We talked about the Cincinnati Bengals and what they're doing with these defensive ends on that line. We talked about the Kansas City Chiefs and whether they're doing enough to keep up and can get back to the Super Bowl again next year. And same thing with the Philadelphia Eagles, both Super Bowl teams. We talked about how well they're trying to beat the talent drain that comes when you're a successful team with a lot of money tied up in other players. So more football talk always on the Locked On NFL podcast. Just make sure you're coming back here for the next Locked On Bears podcast for another opportunity for you to bear down.